You're listening to Remember When with West Britain on the TMC Radio. Every Thursday we take you back in time with your favourite entertainment insiders, such as musicians, actors and comedians. So sit back, relax and reminisce with your host, West Britain.
Hello everyone. Hello all the truckers out there from coast to coast, all of the ships at sea, and all of you private eyes out there with your magnifying glasses trying to solve mysteries. Do private eyes ever use magnifying glasses? I kind of doubt it, to be honest. Anyway, today is our mystery special with two very special guests. Our first interview today is with William Link, who, along with his partner Richard Levinson, co-created some 48 TV mysteries, including Columbo and Murder, She Wrote. And this particular interview is special to me because I interviewed Bill Link for the first time back in 2010. He called me up the next year, right after Peter Falk died in February 2011. And Bill was really upset that his phone wasn't ringing off the hook. He thought every reporter in Hollywood would want to talk to the guy who co-created Columbo, Peter Falk's most iconic character, and it didn't happen. So he called me. That's not all. After we're complete with the Bill Link interview, my good buddy Ian Dickerson is coming on to talk about the Saint. And nobody knows more about the Saint than Ian Dickerson, the honorary secretary of the Saint Club. And you'll get an idea of his expertise in just a few minutes. So this is a whirlwind mystery hour with Columbo and the Saint, as seen through Bill Link and Ian Dickerson.
For many of you, if I simply say the name William Link, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. And for the rest of you, well, trying to summarize his career be a little bit like trying to shoehorn the entire Sherlock Holmes canon into a tweet. It can't be done, but I'll give you some of his highlights. Along with his partner, Richard Levinson, he co-created Mannix, Columbo, Ellery Queen, well, a TV series at least, Murder, She Wrote. On his own, he helped work with Bill Cosby on the Cosby Mysteries. He's written countless, stories for the Alfred Hitchcock magazine, the Ellery Queen magazine. And the one thing we're really going to be talking about today is a brand new book he has that's called the Columbo Collection, in which, as far as I know, the first time a creator of a television character came back to it years later and wrote short stories that will have our friendly Lieutenant Columbo out there doing it all over again. So we'll find out a bit more about that as we bring on board William Link.
Thank you very much, and I'll tell you something, Wes, I want you as my press agent. We'll work out a deal.
Well, all right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe that's the one we'll make some money. Well, I'll tell you what, one place I wanted to start off with was your career in many ways kind of launched when you hooked up with a guy named Richard Levinson. Can you take a few minutes and talk about your friend and
Sure.
How you guys hooked up and all that?
When I was young, 12 years old, two schools amalgamated together, one from Philadelphia proper, and I lived in a community outside of Philadelphia called Elkins Park. And I was told by Dick's friends that I should look for a tall guy who wrote and read mysteries. And Dick was told by some of my friends, look for a short guy who writes and deals with mysteries. So we met at lunchtime the first day of junior high school, and we were writing that afternoon, and he became my best friend and vice versa. And we wrote everything, Broadway musicals, television shows, many, many short stories, 4 books. One was 2 were novels. One was about our experiences in television. And we wrote Until Dick's Death in 1987, a very untimely death.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't that old, but I still miss Dick every day. And I think when I write now, he's really sitting on my shoulder. Bill, that's not a good line. Let's change that. No, that's a little contrived, that plot device, etc. Bernard Shaw once said, when you have a very important friend in your life, you do not lose that person by their death. You only lose that person by your own death. And I find that's absolutely true in the case of Dick Levinson.
How would you describe your different strengths in your collaboration? What did he bring to the table, and what do you think you brought?
We both had, miraculously, the same strengths. That's why I think we're really a dynamic duo. Dick was very good at structuring, as I am at plotting, very good at characterizations, etc. And that's why, after his death, I could continue my career, thank the Lord, because we did have we shared those mutual strengths. After Dick's death, I got a little psychiatric help because it was truly a shock. And I carried on. And I do not fail ever to mention him and how important he was in my life in any of the interviews that I do, etc.
Now, I know you guys worked on a number of different TV episodes and the like. Was Mannix the first series that you two created?
Yes. We took it to Desilu, and we pitched it, and they went for it. And happily, they got a very good star who's a lovely man. I don't know if you ever met him. And it was our first hit. It ran, I believe, for 8 years on CBS. They changed various things in the original pitch, like they gave him a black secretary in Beverly Hills, and we could have never sold that, just a detective in Beverly Hills with a black secretary. Not in those days. But that was our first big hit, and Columbo came a few years later. Columbo was originally a very successful stage play produced by an important Broadway producer in those days, Paul Gregory, and he produced the play. It toured all over the United States very successfully, as I said, and even played in Canada. And then, because we own the series, you never give up the copyright when you do a play. We sold it to Universal about 3-4 years later, and then when Peter Falk got involved, when we cast him, as you know, Wes, the rest is history.
Well, let's back up and do a little bit of that history, because in that stage play, the character Lieutenant Columbo was really just a supporting character. He wasn't the lead, right?
Correct. It was played originally... Well, we first wrote it. There was a writer's strike in 1960 out here, and it was a long strike. It was 5.5 months, it turned out. And Dick and I went back to our favorite city, New York. We were both bachelors then. We rented a huge apartment, 72nd and Broadway, which was owned by a very good television and movie director, Stuart Rosenberg, who turned out to be an old friend of Peter Falk's. And we found out, we always read the small print in contracts, especially the Writers Guild contracts. And we found out that during a strike, you could write for live television, but not for film television. And we saw there was a show on the air called the Chevy Mystery Show. It was a summer replacement for Dinah Shore, who was a big singer in those days.
See the USA in your Chevrolet.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely correct. And we wrote an hour show, and it was bought immediately, and we flew out to Burbank to see it performed live. And after that, the strike was still on. We figured, we could really turn this into a stage play, because live television is very contained. You only have a couple of sets at most, and that works if you want to transform it for the stage. So that's what we did. That's when Paul Gregory picked it up, and it became a hit as a stage play across the country. And then, as I said, 3 or 4 years later, we sold it to Universal. But what we found out was, even though the cop was not really a minor character, but he didn't have the amount of time on the stage occupied by the murdering psychiatrist, who in the play was Joseph Cotton, who was then a big movie star.
A major star, for sure.
Yeah. And Columbo was played by Thomas Mitchell, a wonderful character actor. He was the drunken doctor in Stagecoach. He was the father in Gone with the Wind. He had played cops on the screen in The Dark Mirror and in other movies way back then. And the first time we saw a preview in San Francisco, we couldn't believe it. Cotton came out at the end and got good applause. And then Thomas Mitchell came out in the raincoat and the cigar, and the place went wild. And Dick and I said to each other, well, we created a lot of cops. What does this guy Columbo have? I mean, what's so special? The audience really eats this guy up. And as the years went by, we found out, the television show became a hit all over the world. It's incredible. The original play, Prescription Murder, while we speak, is touring Great Britain. And there's a chance it might come into the West End. The French love Columbo. The Japanese were here at my home 2 years ago, filming an hour-and-a-half interview, interviewing me about the cop. So it goes on, which is great.
Well, I found it interesting that when you were thinking about a TV series, you had Bing Crosby in mind for the role?
Yeah, I know, that sounds weird, but back then, I know. Back then, you got to remember, he was known for the pipe, so you substitute a cigar. He was a nice-looking man.
Yeah.
He was terrific with the humor. We know that from, the pictures he did with Bob Hope, the road pictures.
Absolutely.
So he wasn't too far out. We sent him the script, and he sent us a very nice letter saying he wishes the very best with the script. He really liked it. But he did 2 variety specials for CBS every year, and he was going to stick to that because he was getting older. And he heard that doing a television series was really a grind, which it is. So he passed on it, and we were fortunate because 4 years later he dropped dead of a heart attack playing golf in Madrid.
Well, I guess it's only in retrospect that Peter Falk is just so entrenched in our mind as the character, it's hard to imagine anybody else as
Yeah,
Columbo.
well, see, the stage play is still being done all over the place, and there have been many other Columbos on the stage.
I guess it's Dirk Benedict's doing it now, right?
Yes. I don't remember him. He was on Star Trek, right? I just don't remember.
Trek. I remember the name. Seems like he's a lot of movies, but I don't remember him with.
I think he's a little too attractive, as we'll say, too good-looking. See, we got Falk. Falk is not a bad-looking guy in any sense of the word, but he looks like an everyman,
Yeah.
A guy you see walking on the street past you, if you're in New York or someplace else. And he's not a tall guy. That's also good. And Peter, in real life, shares some of the Columbo characteristics. He stumbles around a bit. I remember at the studio, he used to lose his car keys all the time. We'd have to send a messenger to his house. But the great thing was he was so obsessed with that character, so intensely, and you want a star like that. And he was so hard on the scripts, and you want that too, especially the ending when Columbo comes up with the big clue that Peter called the pop. The pop's got to be terrific. I'm imitating him.
Why not?
He doesn't like that a lot, but it's not very good. But the pop had to be great. And, you can't come up with a great last clue all the times. It would drive us crazy. Sometimes we could get a real good one. It's like we had a wonderful writer, wrote some of the shows. His name was Jackson Gillis. He had written a lot of the Perry Masons. He was the story editor on that show. So he knew mysteries, and he knew construction. And Jackson came up with a clue. Dick and I couldn't come up with one. Jackson came up with a clue that absolutely knocked us out, and that was Columbo traps the killer with fingerprints, not Columbo's fingerprints, the murderer's fingerprints. Now, that's a doozy. To my knowledge, it had never been done before in a mystery, and I've read hundreds of mysteries, through the years. So we were really beholden to Jackson because he really got us out of a hole. We had an air date 4 days later, and Dick and I couldn't come up with anything, and he bailed us out.
Who came up with the idea of your inverted construction by which, in the first, 20, 30 minutes of an episode sometime, we don't even see Columbo. We see the killer and see how he does it, and then when Columbo comes on and we got to watch how he figures it out. Who came up with that idea?
We did, and, we based the character, which we said in a million interviews, on Dostoevsky's Inspector Petrovich in the great classic Crime and Punishment, the Dostoevsky model.
Oh, sure. He badgered that guy and badgered that guy and badgered that guy.
Yes. You can read. The Brits, when they were over here filming me, they came over here too, the BBC, and they had me read some passages from Crime and Punishment. No one ever before had Dick and me do that. That's how shrewd they were. And you could hear Columbo, in the Inspector when he was, dealing with the murderer, the young college kid who
I'm afraid to try to pronounce his name, Rabrilovich or something like that.
Yes, something. He had this Nietzschean philosophy that certain people can kill and they can get away with it. He kills his landlady in Crime and Punishment. But you could hear him, or you could hear Petrovich, the cop, the inspector. There's a little bit, of Columbo in there, and that's where we got it.
When I first saw the original episode, I didn't get the idea that it was, I saw it years later after the series had been on for a while, and I didn't get the idea that the formula had really gelled yet. The Peter Falk seemed a little bit more aggressive, that he was, I didn't even think he was in a raincoat in that first pilot, was he?
Yeah. It was Peter's own raincoat that he had bought in a clothing store when he was caught in a rain squall on 57th Street in New York City. He ducked into the store because he hadn't read the weather report, and it was pouring rain, so he bought the raincoat. And we used that raincoat for many years on Columbo. The wardrobe department made 2 backups in case that coat was torn or anything. But that coat lasted, and Peter Falk always tells audiences, or he used to, that that coat hangs in his upstairs closet in his home in Beverly Hills, and every night he puts out a bowl of milk for it. He's got a wonderful sense of humor, Peter. And that really, that added to Columbo. I had never seen, neither had Dick, Columbo play on the big screen for an audience. I mean, we saw Columbo at our homes, you know, with our wives, and, you know, the shows we had put together, and, you know, it was just us and our wives. But the Museum of Broadcasting out here and the Directors Guild, they had big screen filmings. I think they did the second pilot, Ransom for a Dead Man, the one with Lee Grant. With an audience, it was laughter throughout the picture. And the laughter was at Columbo. The way he walked, the way he looked at people, it was amazing. And, you know, it played almost like a comedy.
Oh, I
couldn't believe it. But that's all fine, you know. If they want to take it, you know, with a comedic spin, great.
I think Peter did a lot of that. Was it true that he would kind of improvise things on the set to throw off the guy playing the villain?
Not dialogue. Peter would not improvise dialogue. That script was sacrosanct. That was the Bible. You do not change a word.
Wrong.
Yeah, and if one of his antagonists, one of the actors, had changed stuff, they'd have to do another take till the guy got it right. And boy, you know, you want an actor like that, your lead actor. You know, that's an 800-pound gorilla, you know, that not only likes bananas, he likes the exact way the script, you know, is performed.
Well, I've got to ask one question for my Prisoner fans, is that you had a number of episodes that starred Patrick McGowan.
Oh, loved him.
And he was
passed, I think, 2 years ago out here.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah,
well,
we loved him. And we loved him and Jack Cassidy. Jack Cassidy was another one of our favorites, those two. And Peter loved both of them, too. And that's what we used them whenever we could get them. But then Cassidy died. I think a lit cigarette went up in his mattress. And that was terrible when that happened. So couldn't get him again. It was always important on Columbo to have a very powerful antagonist against Columbo. And also, you know, we played the class game. Mm-hmm. Columbo always went up against the rich, you know, the wealthy. Mm-hmm. The New York Times said back then, it's almost as if Columbo was captured by a helicopter while he was eating a hot dog in the stands at Yankee Stadium, watching a game, and dropped into a wealthy murderer's backyard in Brentwood. And that's a very wealthy area out here in Los Angeles. And they were right. We played the class card, and it worked for us. Because a lot of people, you know, who watch the series all over the world, they weren't wealthy. And, you know, they identified more with the cop, you know, who started with nothing, who was against these arrogant, wealthy murderers, men and women, and he wins out. So that was a big plus, we thought.
Now, why did you decide after all these years to return to Columbo and then do an anthology of short stories?
Well, because through the years, especially after Dick's death, I've sold many, many short stories, as you mentioned before, to the Hitchcock magazine, but mostly to Janet Hutchings, who's the head of the Ellery Queen Mystery magazine. I'm sending her 2 more stories this week, 2 new ones, not Columbo. And I figured, you know, I did all these, you know, stories with other heroes and, you know, other villains, but the most popular show Dick and I ever conceived was Columbo. Why not write some Columbo short stories, which I can do in my sleep? And so that's what I did. And then a publisher came around and said, hey, I'll do these, and that's it. They're out there now.
Do you feel there's any differences between the short stories and the longer movies? Well, obviously, length is one thing, but I remember when I read them, I also noticed that there's the guys are using cell phones and things like that weren't around back in the 70s and 80s.
No. Yes, some of the short stories have unknown murders. Columbo was always a, will he catch him? You always knew who the murderer was at the beginning for the first 17, 18 minutes, of the show. And that, when we first started the series, that bugged NBC, and they said, well, people won't wait around to see when Columbo comes in. And we said, trust us. They will wait to see Peter Falk as Columbo. And, of course, we were right. For many years, we were the #1 show. So that's how I changed the format in the short stories. Some were murder mysteries, unknown killers, and some were the exact way we did them on the air.
In some of those stories, I also noticed that we get some revelations about the character, because mean, Lieutenant Columbo is always an enigma. We don't know his first name, and we're not really sure about his family. He seems to have more nieces and cousins and uncles and aunts than probably anybody. Is that by design to kind of give him this enigmatic background? We never see his wife and all that?
Yes, absolutely. We had a pact with Peter Falk very early in the show that we would never see the wife. I once said to Peter, maybe Columbo is a bachelor who lives in a walk-up apartment by himself, and all these nephews and uncles and, nieces that he talks about, maybe they're he uses that at times to confuse the murderer. Maybe they don't exist. Peter did not like that at all. He thought, no, they really exist. And look, if that's what he thought, fine. We never got into that. But you never saw Mrs. Columbo, and you'll never see her in the short stories either.
That's right. I gather you didn't think much of the spin-off series with, what was that, Kate McGraw?
Awful.
I didn't think much of that one either.
You know who we wanted? We wanted... Kate Mulgrew is a good actress. She's from Canada, and I have nothing against her acting. But I don't think, she was too attractive to be a Mrs. Columbo. We wanted somebody like Brenda Vaccaro, who isn't an ugly a woman by any sense. But if you know what I mean, if you remember her, she was more like Peter in the looks department and the way she acted. I could believe that she was an Italian cop's Italian wife, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Kate did seem like she's kind of too cute and pretty and...
No, that was the cliche in all the other television series. Dick and I always wanted to break cliches if we could in a good way. And I think that's what we accomplished in a lot of things that we did. All this Dick and I thought out way ahead of time, what we wanted to do. We had television in our veins up to our fingertips. We'd first started writing, back when we met in junior high school, and there were wonderful live shows on then from New York. And they had wonderful writers writing a lot of them. The great Patty Chayefsky, who wrote Network, when he went into feature films, Gore Vidal, and others. And, Dick and I grew up, with those writers who were very, very good, and those people were our idols. Also, all the mystery books that we read. We read Raymond Chandler. I don't know if you know George Simenon. He's a great Belgian.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yes, he has the McGray series, The Cop, and his standalone books without McGray, I think, are even better. But I've read over 200 of the Simenon novels, the Simenon novels, and it's incredible. The man wrote 600 books in his lifetime.
A few months ago, we had on Agatha Christie biographer Laura Thompson. Were you an Agatha Christie fan?
Oh, yeah. She was brilliant. Brilliant. One of the greats. And I think we're all influenced, even the people who haven't read Agatha Christie, she has mutated in many other authors' works. And she absolutely was, the queen of mysteries during her time. I really hope she's still read. I don't know if she is.
Yeah, she's all still in print, and her fandom is astonishing.
Good.
It is enormous. Yes, you don't worry about her legacy. In fact, her Rogue series is still going on PBS even as we speak.
Yes, that's true. She was wonderful.
Well, alrighty. Well, sometime we're going to have to bring you back on and focus on Murder, She Wrote and the Cosmic Mysteries and some other things. But
sure, my pleasure.
Today's our day for Columbo. So do you have any words for potential readers of your book? What will they find in it? Short stories that will be, I found very easy, nice bedtime reading, because you can read 3 or 4 of these stories.
Sure. You can read them before bedtime if you don't have other more important things to do. I'll leave that up to the minds of your radio audience.
I figured I'd dodge that one, Will.
And it's a great beach book, and I think it's a relaxing book, even though it's about murders. That's incredible. In fact, Columbo says that, I think, in Prescription Murder. He finds mysteries very relaxing, and that got a big laugh, usually from the audience. Mysteries, relaxing, well, actually they are. I want to get a plug in. The book can be purchased on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Facebook, or they get it at my website, www.williamlink.tv. They can get it there if they're interested.
And in case we didn't make the title clear, it's the Columbo Collection.
Correct, William Link.
Yes, it's really easy to pick up your copy, and it really is an enjoyable read. I posted a review of it at bookpleasures.com a couple of months ago, and I advise it, even if you're not a Columbo fan, if you're just a mystery fan, there's lots of stories in there. Did you know, if you go all the way back to 1928, Leslie Charteris' famous character, Simon Templar, debuted in Meet the Tiger and was in a whole decade's worth of books and short stories, and was a long-time radio character. And among the folks who played him was a guy named Vincent Price, a movie star, with everybody from George Saunders to Tom Conway to Val Kilmer. Let's see what else. Oh, yeah, TV, Roger Moore, Simon Dutton, Ian Ogilvy, all kinds of nonfiction books about him. Well, to tell the whole story of the saint would take a heck of a long time. And one person who can tell us an awful lot about it is a gentleman who's the Honorary Secretary of the Saint Club. I've known him for a very long time, and we're only able to scratch the surface of his involvement with the saint and ideas about what's going to be happening for Simon Templar in 2013. So let me shut up and bring on, I was going to say Ian Ogilvy, but that's not right, is it? No, it's Ian Dickerson. Although, well, I guess the reason it was in my mind is that I was rereading my interview I did with you a few years ago from my website, Ian, and it was kind of Ian Ogilvy that got you interested in the saint. Did I get that right?
It was indeed. It was. I'd always read books and watched lots of television as a child, and I was 8 or 9 years old, and I loved watching Return of the Saint on TV. And, for me it was appointment television. I had to sit there every Sunday and watch it. And when I discovered that my eldest brother had a couple of books about a guy called the Saint, it seemed natural to nick them and read them. And I discovered the books were actually better than the TV show. So I spent many years and far too much of my pocket money collecting as many Saint books as I could. And at one stage wrote off to join the Saint Club. There was a very old advert in one of the books, and I was rather pleasantly surprised when I actually got a response and enrolled in the Saint Club. For many years I was a sort of somewhat passive member, got the Christmas letters from Leslie, ordered a few bits and pieces of merchandise, and that was it. And when the new show was announced in the 1980s, I wrote to the Saint Club and said, look, you've got an opportunity here. You've got a great opportunity to shout about who you are, what you do, and really try and get the Saint and the Saint Club back in the public consciousness. Well, the chap who was running the club at the time didn't really want to do it. So he passed my letter on to Leslie Charteris, and I was away at college at the time, and one evening Leslie rang me up, and my jaw promptly hit the floor.
I would think, not to mention the rest of your anatomy.
Yeah, pretty much. But from then on, he said, well, let's talk, let's come and have dinner. So I went to have dinner with him and his lovely wife, Audrey, and that kicked off a friendship, which in some ways was rather odd because, he was a 70-something retired best-selling author, and I was a very naive 17-year-old teenager. Had monthly dinners with him, had lots of weekly phone calls with him, and became good friends.
One of the things I noticed in one of those past interviews, when you talked about all those books that he wrote about the Saint, and you keep promising and never get around to writing your biography of Leslie Charteris, but you seem to indicate that in all those books, they are very autobiographical, that there's a lot of Leslie Charteris in Saint-Simon Templar. What do you mean by that?
Many things. There's a lot of factual parts from Leslie's life in the Saint books. That there's the Saint at one stage lived in Mansion Gate in London in a house that was actually at one stage lived in by Leslie and his first wife Pauline, for example. So there's lots of sort of factual points that you can find throughout the Saint books that tally to Leslie's life. The Saint and Leslie Charteris dined at very similar restaurants and cafes in London. But it's more than that. The Saint, it harks back to Leslie's early years. He was born in Singapore to a Chinese doctor and an English lady. And Singapore at the time was very colonial, and even at an early age he suffered from racism out there because the European children were told not to play with the Chinese, and the Chinese were told not to play with the Europeans. And Leslie and his brother Roy were half and half, so they didn't get to play with anyone. So he was very much an outsider in Singapore. When his parents split up in 1919 and his mother brought him and Roy back to London, he also suffered racism again. For many years in his formative years, when he was at school and at university, he couldn't win. English people didn't want to talk to Asian people. Asian people, if there were some in London, didn't really want to know him because he had an English gene running through him. So his creation of the Saint, who is, pretty much an outsider himself, was very much a sort of element of wish fulfillment on his part.
I remember reading that Leslie thought that the Saint was kind of his dream self, that wish fulfillment you were talking about, that Simon Templar was doing all the things that Leslie Charteris himself couldn't do.
Absolutely, but then Leslie was very realistic, and there's a quote from Leslie, where he points out that he is not Simon Templar, Simon Templar is not he, for Simon Templar is physically faster, better, smarter, but there is a strong element of wouldn't it be nice if I was a superhero sort of thing running through it.
Oh, sure. That's almost everybody's kind of superhero creations, whether it be James Bond or Leslie Charteris or whatever. Now, you've also said in various interviews that the Saint, especially in his different media incarnations, changed over the years and kind of reflected the times at which the stories were being written and produced and the media was being put together. Can you talk about that for a bit? How has the Saint changed since, 1928?
The early books particularly portrayed a Saint as something of a P.G. Wodehouse sort of character, someone who was full of P.G. Wodehouse dialogue, who had a strong sense of humor, would break out in the middle of the story to write a poem that was quite sort of pointed, and was generally having a lot more fun. And as the books evolved, as Leslie evolved, Leslie moved to America, so it was natural that the Saint would move to America in the 30s. And if you're in America in the 30s and writing books, you end up getting hit by the sort of the hard-boiled, noirish sort of detective genre. So the Saint and Leslie went straight into that, and obviously the war would have a significant impact on his character as well, because the Saint couldn't go around fighting the sort of tuppence halfpenny baddies that he did, particularly in the early 30s, and he had to deal with the war in some way. So he became sort of loosely associated with unspecified authorities and helping fight the Nazis. And afterwards, when Leslie had matured himself and started travelling around the world a bit more, the Saint followed suit and became something of a citizen of the world and a world traveller, and becoming a little bit world-weary. And when these books at various stages were adapted for whatever media, these adaptations were very much done of their time. You look at, Roger Moore's TV series now, and it is just the 60s. You can tell what year it was made. You can tell it was made in the 60s. You can tell by looking at it. Look at Ian Ogilvy's show, and the fashions instantly give it away as a 1970s production, let alone the sort of characterization and what was going on in the world at the time. Look at the radio series, 1940s ones with Vincent Price, and they are very much of their time. Even, bring it up to date, the 1997 movie with Val Kilmer, which, I don't want to be too rude about it, but you look back at it now, and it wasn't a bad movie, it just wasn't The Saint. But even now, you look at the costumes and the music, and you just know that it came from the 1990s.
What would you say distinguished the Saint from all the other kinds of literary characters that came out during the 20s and the 30s? Because that was kind of the Clubland era, and we had Dornford Yates and John Butchin and all kinds of other pre-Bondian characters. What set Simon Templar apart?
I think it's a combination of the simplicity and strength of his character combined with Leslie's remarkable talent as a writer.
And, of course, in all those books, there's a lot of supporting characters that we never really get too much of in either the radio, TV, or the films. There's Patricia, and for a while there, he had a little gang running with him, right?
He did, and it was very much a sort of early years thing, because Leslie thought that the Saint was much better operating on his own and would involve members of the public or characters and damsels in distress as and when needed. But he did move on to be a sort of sole operator there.
Of course, of course, we mentioned before, one of the most famous adaptations was the Roger Moore TV series. You can almost say it was kind of two series. There's the black and white, and then there was the color that Roger Moore was co-owner of. One of the things that I really kind of enjoyed in your book, which we need to mention, that's called The Saint on TV, is Leslie had some back and forth opinions about that TV show, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Leslie himself had spent about 10 years trying to get The Saint on TV throughout the 1950s, and had become resolutely cynical about the possibility of it happening, let alone what it would look like if it did actually eventually happen. So when Bob Baker had finally secured the rights deal and got the show into production in the early 60s, he was resigned to it being awful. He expected the show to fail. He expected the show to be radically different from his books. But he was on a learning curve. He grew to appreciate what television could do and did for his character. And by the end of the show's initial run, he struck up a friendship with Bob Baker, which would last for the rest of their lives, and had begun to appreciate what had been done for it.
It seems like a lot of the early episodes were based on stories of his, so they had to stretch them out and add in extra characters and things like that. But I think he got the idea that TV was, I think one of his phrases was wishy-washy. They couldn't get as gritty or get as realistic as he could. Is that about right?
I think so. I mean, I think back then, in a sort of very much a pre-internet world, writers had a very fixed idea that if you were going to buy their book or property to adapt for television, then you had to stick to it fairly literally, regardless of whether it would suit the time slot or whatever else. So, he had a fairly fixed opinion that if you were going to adapt one of his books for TV, he would expect to see it all on screen. And, of course, that's not the way it worked. Right. It didn't work like that then, and it doesn't work like that now.
How many books and stories did he write during his lifetime?
There are almost 100 original Saint books, and I include in that 50 English language titles and 40 which were written directly into French and have been translated into Dutch but never into English.
I find that astonishing. I mean, that's quite an outpouring. Of course, a lot of that's collections of short stories, and folks, they do underrate. Some of them are very gritty and realistic, and some of them are rather fantastic, where the Loch Ness Monster makes an appearance and things like that. Leslie didn't stick to any one particular kind of genre, whodunit or spy fire. He really loved doing all kinds of different kinds of stories, didn't he?
He did, and I think this is one thing that helped the Saint's longevity as well, because you know, for a TV show and for the books, you never quite knew whether it was going to be a caper story, a heist story, a spy story, or any other kind of story. And you know, that variety really did help extend the character's life, I think.
I think in the 60s, too, the fact he was able to kind of hook on vicariously with the James Bond thing, because he had the Volvo car that kind of became his signature, and that trademark halo that was popping up over his head, and the whistle theme, I guess, had been set up by George Saunders. But
well, it was actually set up by Leslie in the 1940s. He came up with it himself. And it was used, obviously, in the RKO movies and onwards from that. But it is his own theme, and even now with the new pilot in production, they have the rights. They have to use what's called the Saint's theme by Leslie Charteris, and it is that sort of familiar 7 or 8 note refrain. And I apologise in advance because I'm not musically knowledgeable, so I'm just quoting someone else there.
Yeah, we mentioned that you wrote the book, The Saint on TV. What can people find in that book? I guess that came out last fall, if I remember correctly.
It came out last fall, yeah. It basically is a story about the complete history of the Saint on TV, and that includes not just the series that made it into production, but the series that didn't make it into production, and the ideas that were mooted around that time as well. It dates from 1945, when Leslie wanted to try and get into television himself, right up to, well, it's now actually last year, because I left the story at the time when James Purefoy was...
And one of the things I like about that book is that you've got some really cool appendices in there. Can you share with the folks what they are?
I have, yeah. I mean, what I've found is a couple of unproduced Saint scripts. So there's one script in there which was written by Leslie himself in the early 1950s when he was trying to get the Saint on TV. And there's another script in there which was written by John Goldsmith and is based fairly heavily on one of Leslie's novels. This was written in the early 1980s at a time when Roger Moore and Bob Baker were looking to mount a series of Saint films set in the 1930s. And they were very close to casting what was then a young Pierce Brosnan in the role.
Yeah. Well, let's get on that for a little bit, because you've hinted at that there's a pilot in the works right now. It seems like since the mid-'80s until now, there's been all this talk about the Saint coming back and the Saint coming back, and Roger Moore's going to be there as a father figure. We're going to have a Simon Templar Jr. running around doing the adventures, and things don't happen, and things don't happen, and things... Well, what's happening now?
We are currently in production, that's the reason I'm in Los Angeles, with a 60-minute pilot for a new series of The Saint. This pilot has been 8 years and 2 months in the making.
Whoa.
One of the reasons it's taken so long is because we have been so desperately keen to make it true to the original character. All of us behind this project have a almost genetic now belief that there is a place in the 21st century for a saint who is obviously updated, you know, but we think the Saint on TV would work like a treat now, and we've been very keen to ensure that any show that gets produced does honour that character.
Now, you say that you're in production. Does that mean you've done the casting, you've got some scripts, you've got whatever you got?
We've done the casting. We are shooting the pilot at the moment, although we are actually in the middle of a couple of days off. We have a cast. We have Adam Rayner as Simon Templar. Oh. Adam is a British actor who has recently been seen in a BBC and Cinemax series called Hunted. Before then did a show called Mistresses in the UK, and I believe an American show called Hawthorne. I should perhaps explain here that, you know, as I say, it's taken 8 years and 2 months to get to this stage, and I've become resolutely cynical about this, not just as to whether it would actually ever happen, but whether it would actually be any good. And I've been on set for the last few days, and I've got to say, Adam is just brilliant as the Saint. He is a 21st century Simon Templar, and I can't wait to see the final product, and I can't wait for everyone else to see the final product, because I think they'll have a lot of fun.
When are we set to see the pilot? Is that going to be this fall, this summer, next year?
What an excellent question, and I wish I had an absolute answer for you. We finish shooting in a couple of weeks, and obviously it then has to go into post-production and editing. We are looking then to take it to market probably February, March time, and then basically sell it to whatever TV networks will be interested, and look towards getting the series commissioned from then on. So I would hope people will see it on air sometime this year.
Are you gunning for network? Are you gunning for cable? Are you gunning for syndication, or any of the above?
In the US, ideally we'd like network. It's a tough marketplace at the moment. There are shows, like Burn Notice and Leverage and White Collar, which exist very well on cable. But looking at what we're seeing, it is very much a sort of network appealing show. So I think in the US we'll aim for the networks. In the UK, we're kind of hoping sort of Sky or ITV may be quite interested.
I'm guessing you keep saying 21st century, so you didn't make this a period piece like you'd hoped for before, but he's going to be, in 2012, we're going to see Simon Templar running around.
Yeah, it's been one of my dreams. I would so love to see a period Saint production, but it's awfully expensive to mount that sort of thing nowadays. So you have to be realistic. It's not saying that this is being done on the cheap, not by any way, shape or form. There are many millions of dollars going into this production, and it looks like it. You see the money on screen. But unfortunately, period just wouldn't sell.
Is Roger Moore involved in it anymore? Has he kind of moved on?
No, Roger is involved. Roger is a co-producer. He's very active in it, and we're hoping to shoot a cameo role with him next month.
Oh, okay. So there you have it, folks. There's a lot of saintly news to keep your eyes out for. I'm keenly interested in the TV show.